In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and ambition filled the air, a young woman named Maya found herself sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. The room was sleek, polished marble floors, glass walls that reflected the city's skyline, and chairs so comfortable they almost made you forget how intimidating the space really was. But Maya wasn't there to admire the view or marvel at the luxury. She had earned her seat at the table through hard work, determination, and a relentless drive to make a difference. Maya was just 24 years old, fresh out of college but already making waves as an intern turned junior analyst at one of the CEO's subsidiaries. Her journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in a low-income neighborhood, she'd learned early on that opportunities didn't come knocking. They had to be fought for. And fight she did. Through scholarships, late-night study sessions, and countless sacrifices, she landed a spot in this prestigious company. Now here she was, invited to present her findings on a new contract proposal that promised to expand services into underserved communities. For Maya, this wasn't just another task on her to-do list. It was personal. She knew what it meant to grow up without access to resources others took for granted. Good schools, reliable internet, mentors who believed in your potential. This project could change lives, including those of kids like her younger self. So when the CEO, a man known for his charm and commanding presence, greeted her with a warm smile and extended handshake, Maya felt both excitement and nerves bubbling inside her. The CEO introduced himself again, though everyone in the room already knew his name. He handed her a thick folder containing the revised contract draft. On the surface, it looked impressive. Bold headlines promised equity and inclusion. Charts showed projections of growth and impact. It seemed like the kind of initiative that would win awards and earn glowing press coverage. But Maya had learned long ago not to take things at face value. She flipped through the pages slowly, scanning each line carefully while the CEO engaged her in small talk. "How are you finding the role so far?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with an ease that came from years of being in charge. "It's been challenging but rewarding," Maya replied, keeping her tone polite yet professional. She wasn't about to let her guard down, even if his demeanor suggested he wanted to put her at ease. As she continued reading, something caught her eye. Deep within Section 14B, hidden among dense legal jargon, was a clause that didn't sit right with her. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough, a provision allowing the company flexibility in hiring practices under certain conditions. But Maya's instincts kicked in. She'd seen clauses like this before, disguised as practical solutions, but ultimately designed to protect corporate interests over community needs. Her mind raced as she processed what this could mean. If left unchecked, this clause would give the company permission to sidestep local hiring mandates whenever it suited them. Instead of creating jobs for people in the communities they claimed to serve, they could bring in cheaper labor from elsewhere, or, worse, automate positions entirely. It was a loophole big enough to drive a truck through, and Maya knew exactly who would bear the brunt of it, the very people the initiative claimed to help. She glanced up briefly, noticing the confident expressions. Around the table, no one else seemed troubled by the document in front of them. They nodded along as the CEO spoke, their pens poised to sign off on whatever he proposed. Maya felt a pang of doubt creep in. Should she say something? Would anyone listen? Or would speaking up only paint a target on her back? But then she remembered why she was here. She thought about the little girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of a better future despite all the odds stacked against her. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent researching and analyzing data to ensure this project lived up to its promises. And she thought about the faces of the people whose lives hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, Maya set the folder down on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she looked directly at the CEO and said, "Excuse me, but this clause is a trap." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a moment, there was complete silence. The CEO's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, and perhaps irritation. He tilted his head slightly, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. Then, recovering quickly, he chuckled lightly and said, "Oh, do tell us more." Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. This was her moment, whether she liked it or not. And as she prepared to explain herself, she realized something important. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who deserved a fair shot at success. When the CEO asked her to explain, Maya took a deep breath. She could feel all eyes on her, some curious, others skeptical. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the folder again, flipping it open to the page with the problematic clause. She cleared her throat and began speaking, her voice calm but firm. This clause here, she said, pointing to the specific line, allows the company to bypass local hiring requirements if they decide there aren't enough qualified candidates available in the community. She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. But what does qualified mean? Who gets to decide that? And how will this affect the people we're supposed to be helping? The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air. Conditioning. Maya continued, explaining how similar clauses had been used in other contracts before. Instead of creating jobs for locals, companies often brought in workers from outside or relied on automation. This left communities worse off than before, despite promises of improvement. She pulled out a printed copy of her research notes, filled with examples from past projects. One case stood out, a tech initiative in a rural area where less than 10% of promised jobs went to local residents. The rest were outsourced or automated within months. Maya shared these numbers, her tone steady but passionate. If we don't address this now, history will repeat itself. We'll walk away thinking we've done something good, but the people who need help the most won't see any real change. At first, the CEO tried to brush her concerns aside. He chuckled nervously, waving a hand as if to say, "You're overthinking this." But Maya didn't stop. She leaned forward, making sure everyone in the room could see the seriousness in her eyes. "This isn't just about one clause," she said. "It's about trust. These communities have been let down time and time again. If we want them to believe in us, we need to show them we're serious." Her argument struck a nerve. One by one, the executives around the table started nodding. Some scribbled notes furiously. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Even the CEO couldn't ignore the logic behind her points. Still, he wasn't ready to admit she was right. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Well, I appreciate your perspective," he said, his smile tight and forced. "But sometimes flexibility is necessary for these kinds of projects. We can't predict every challenge we might face." Maya didn't flinch. "Flexibility is important," she agreed, "but not at the expense of fairness. If we build loopholes into our contracts, we're setting ourselves up to fail. Not just the communities, but the company too. People won't trust us if they think we're cutting corners." Her words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the senior analysts chimed in, supporting Maya's point. "She's got a valid concern," he said, looking at the CEO. "We should revisit this section and make sure it aligns with our goals." Another executive nodded. "I agree. Transparency is key. If we're serious about making an impact, we need to hold ourselves accountable." The CEO's expression darkened. It was clear he hadn't expected this kind of pushback, especially not from someone so junior. He glanced at his watch, then back at Maya, his smile fading completely. "All right," he said finally, his tone clipped. "Let's take another look at this. Thank you for bringing it to our attention." As the meeting wrapped up, the tension in the room was palpable. Maya gathered her papers, her mind racing. Had she crossed a line? Would standing up for what she believed in cost her career? She couldn't tell yet, but one thing was certain. She'd planted a seed of doubt in the minds of those who thought they could get away with cutting corners, a seed of hope for the communities counting on this project to deliver real change. Walking out of the conference room, Maya felt a mix of emotions: pride, fear, and determination. She knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it might only be beginning, but for now she allowed herself a small smile. She had spoken her truth, and that was something no one could take away from her. Later that day, whispers spread through the office like wildfire. People talked about what had happened in the meeting, some praising Maya's courage, others warning her to tread carefully. One colleague approached her desk, leaning in close. "That was brave," they said quietly. "Be careful, though. You don't want to make enemies." Maya nodded, thanking them for their concern, but inside she felt anything but scared. Yes, challenging power came with risks, but staying silent carried its own dangers. And after today, she realized she wasn't alone. There were others who saw the flaws in the system, who wanted to do better but didn't know how to start. Maybe, just maybe, her actions would inspire them to speak up too. That evening, as she packed up her things and headed home, Maya replayed the day's events in her mind. She thought about the CEO's reaction, the nods of agreement from her colleagues, and the weight of responsibility she now carried. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she allowed herself to feel proud. Proud of taking a stand. Proud of refusing to stay quiet, and proud of proving that even the smallest voice could spark big changes. The next morning, Maya walked into the office feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt a quiet sense of pride for standing her ground and speaking up. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the nagging fear that things might not go well for her. Word had spread quickly about what happened in the meeting with the CEO. Some people whispered behind her back as she passed by, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear that her bold move had stirred something, a mix of admiration, discomfort, and maybe even anger. At first, Maya tried to brush it off. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and dove into her work, hoping to keep her mind occupied. But it wasn't long before the tension became impossible to ignore. A senior manager stopped by her cubicle, his expression unreadable. "You really shook things up yesterday," he said, his tone somewhere between impressed and cautious. "Just be careful, okay? Not everyone takes kindly to being called out." Maya nodded politely, thanking him for the advice, but inside, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What did be careful really mean? Was she walking into trouble without realizing it? She glanced around the office and noticed how some of her colleagues seemed to be deliberately avoiding her. Conversations paused when she walked by, and once friendly faces now looked uneasy. It was as if she'd suddenly become untouchable, a reminder of how risky it could be to challenge authority. Later that afternoon, an email popped up on her screen. The subject line read, "Urgent, meeting request from HR." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she clicked to open it. The message was short and formal, asking her to come to a meeting later that day to discuss recent conduct. No details, no explanation, just those vague words that made her stomach churn. For a moment, panic set in. Had she gone too far? Was this the beginning of the backlash she'd feared? She replayed the meeting in her head, wondering if there was anything she could have done differently. But deep down she knew she hadn't been wrong. The clause was a trap, and pointing it out was the right thing to do. Still, doing the right thing didn't always protect you from consequences. When the time came, Maya headed to the HR department, her steps heavy with dread. The office was small and sterile, with beige walls and framed motivational posters that felt more ironic than inspiring. She was ushered into a conference room where 2 HR representatives waited, their expressions neutral but uninviting. They gestured for her to sit, and after a brief pause, one of them began speaking. "We wanted to talk to you about your behavior during yesterday's meeting," the first representative said, flipping through some papers on the table. "There have been concerns raised about professionalism." Maya blinked, taken aback. "Professionalism?" she repeated, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I was presenting my analysis based on data and research. I thought that was part of my job." The second representative chimed in, softer but no less firm. "It's not about the content of your presentation. It's about how it was delivered." Challenging the CEO so directly in front of the team, it created tension. People feel uncomfortable. Maya leaned back slightly, processing their words. So this was it. She was being reprimanded not because she was wrong, but because she had dared to speak up in a way that disrupted the status quo. It stung, but it also clarified something for her. This wasn't just about her, it was about power, about who got to decide what was acceptable and what wasn't. And clearly, challenging someone like the CEO, even with facts and logic, wasn't considered acceptable. "I understand," Maya said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But if I see something that could harm the company or the communities we're supposed to serve, shouldn't I say something? Isn't that part of accountability?" The HR reps exchanged glances, neither offering a direct answer. Instead, they outlined the next steps. She would be placed on probationary status for the remainder of her internship. Any further incidents deemed unprofessional could result in termination. It was a thinly veiled warning, a reminder of how fragile her position really was. As Maya left the meeting, her mind raced. Probation, that was serious. It meant her future at the company, and possibly her career, was hanging by a thread. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she risked too much? Was standing up for justice worth losing everything she'd worked so hard for? But then she remembered why she'd started this journey in the first place. Growing up, she'd seen firsthand how systems failed people who didn't have a voice. She'd promised herself that if she ever had the chance to make a difference, she wouldn't stay silent. Walking away from that promise now would mean betraying not just others, but herself. That evening, Maya sat alone in her apartment staring at the city lights outside her window. She replayed the events of the past 2 days, the confrontation with the CEO, the whispers in the office, the HR meeting. Each moment weighed heavily on her, but there was also a flicker of hope. She realized that her actions had already sparked something bigger than she'd anticipated. Even if she lost her job, she'd planted a seed of awareness, of questioning, of change. Just as she was about to turn off her laptop for the night, her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a post on social media. Curious, she opened the app and froze. There, in black and white, was the original contract draft she'd analyzed, all 50 pages of it. Someone had leaked it online, along with screenshots of her presentation slides and notes. The post had blown up overnight, with thousands of likes, shares, and comments. "This is insane," Maya muttered under her breath, scrolling through the reactions. People were praising her courage, calling her a hero for standing up to corporate greed. Activists and community leaders were dissectingly analyzing the problematic clause, using her findings to highlight systemic issues in corporate practices. Hashtags like corporate accountability and stand with her were trending. Suddenly, her phone buzzed non-stop with messages and calls. Friends, family, former classmates, all reaching out to congratulate her or offer support. Journalists were requesting interviews, eager to hear her side of the story. Overnight, she had gone from being an intern facing potential termination to a symbol of resistance against unethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just hours earlier, she'd been sitting in an HR meeting, fearing the worst. Now the entire world seemed to be watching and rooting for her. It was overwhelming but also empowering. For the first time since the meeting, she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe this fight wasn't hers alone anymore. Maybe she had allies she didn't even know existed. The next morning, Maya walked into the office again, this time with her head held high. The atmosphere was different now. Colleagues who had previously avoided her approached her desk to offer quiet words of encouragement. One even slipped her a note that read, "We're with you." Even the CEO seemed to keep his distance, his usual confidence replaced by a subtle unease. Maya smiled to herself, realizing that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most unexpected victories. The buzz around Maya's story grew louder with each passing hour. By mid-morning, it felt like the entire office was caught in a whirlwind of whispers and speculation. The leaked contract had ignited a firestorm online, and now the spotlight was firmly on the company and on Maya herself. People were talking about her everywhere, in news articles, social media threads, podcasts, and even late-night talk shows. She wasn't just an intern anymore. She was a symbol of standing up for what's right, even when the odds were stacked against you. But fame, or infamy, wasn't something Maya had ever wanted. As she sat at her desk, scrolling through endless notifications on her phone, she felt overwhelmed. Messages poured in from strangers thanking her for speaking out, sharing their own stories of being let down by big corporations. Some called her brave. Others said she'd inspired them to take a stand in their own lives. It was humbling, but also exhausting. How could one person carry the weight of so many expectations? Still, amidst the chaos, there was a sense of validation. For years, Maya had felt like the odd one out, someone who didn't quite belong in these polished corporate spaces. Now people were finally listening to her voice. Not because she'd shouted the loudest, but because she'd spoken the truth. That realization gave her strength, even as the pressure mounted. Back in the office, things were starting to shift. Colleagues who had previously avoided her began approaching her desk, offering quiet words of support. One woman stopped by during lunch break, clutching a cup of coffee nervously. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're doing something important here." Maya smiled softly, touched by the gesture. "We all have a role to play," she replied. "This isn't just about me. It's about making sure we do better." The woman nodded, then quickly walked away, glancing over her shoulder as if worried someone might see her talking to Maya. It was clear that not everyone felt comfortable showing their support openly. Fear still lingered in the air, a reminder of how powerful the system they worked within truly was. But every small act of solidarity mattered. Each nod, each whispered, "Thank you," fueled Maya's determination to keep going. Meanwhile, the CEO was feeling the heat too. He had always been a master of controlling narratives, spinning every situation to his advantage. But this time, he was struggling to regain control. Reporters were calling nonstop, demanding statements about the controversial clause and the allegations of exploitation. Community leaders were organizing protests outside the company's headquarters, holding signs that read, "No more empty promises," and "Justice over profits." Inside the boardroom, tensions were running high. The CEO convened an emergency meeting with senior executives, his usual charm replaced by frustration and defensiveness. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, slamming a stack of papers onto the table. "We can't let some intern dictate how we run this company." One executive cleared his throat cautiously. "With respect, sir, this isn't just about her. The public perception has shifted. People are questioning our intentions. If we don't address this properly, it could damage our reputation permanently." Another chimed in, his tone measured but firm. "They're right. We need to show that we're taking this seriously. Maybe revisiting the contract wouldn't be such a bad idea." The CEO's jaw tightened. He hated being backed into a corner, especially by his own team. But he knew they weren't wrong. Public opinion mattered, a lot. And right now the tide was turning against him. Reluctantly, he agreed to launch an internal review of the contract, though he framed it as a routine process rather than admitting fault. For Maya, the days that followed were a blur of interviews, meetings, and constant attention. Journalists camped outside the office building, eager to get a comment from her. Activists reached out, asking her to join panels and speak at events. Offers poured in from rival companies and nonprofit organizations, all wanting to work with her. It was flattering, but also daunting. She hadn't planned for any of this. All she'd wanted was to point out a problem and push for a solution. Through it all, she tried to stay grounded. Her family back home checked in daily, reminding her of where she came from and why she was fighting. "Don't let them intimidate you," her mom told her during one phone call. "You've got this far because you believe in something bigger than yourself. Keep your head up, baby girl." Her mom's words stuck with her. They reminded her that this fight wasn't just about contracts or clauses. It was about people. Real people whose lives depended on whether companies chose profit over fairness. Every decision mattered, every action rippled outward. And Maya knew she couldn't give up. Not now, not when momentum was building. As the weeks went by, the pressure on the company continued to mount. Protesters gathered outside the headquarters every morning, chanting slogans and holding banners. Employees started speaking up too, sharing anonymous stories about unethical practices they'd witnessed. One former worker revealed how similar loopholes had been used in past projects, leaving communities worse off despite promises of improvement. Another recounted how local hires were often laid off once funding dried up, replaced by cheaper labor or automation. These revelations added fuel to the fire. Media coverage intensified, and soon major investors began voicing concerns. Shareholders demanded answers, threatening to pull funding if the company didn't take concrete steps to address the backlash. The board of directors held another, urgent meeting, this time without the CEO present. Behind closed doors, they debated his leadership style and questioned whether he was still the right person to steer the company through this crisis. By the end of the month, the cracks in the I Foundation were impossible to ignore. The CEO issued a public apology, acknowledging the flaws in the contract and pledging to make changes. He promised stricter protections for workers and genuine commitments to community development. While the statement was carefully worded to avoid admitting wrongdoing, it was enough to quell some of the outrage. For now, for Maya, watching the CEO concede, even reluctantly, was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt like a victory. The company was finally being held accountable for its actions and real change seemed possible. On the other hand, she knew this was only the beginning. Fixing systemic issues wouldn't happen overnight. It would take sustained effort, transparency, and courage to ensure that promises were kept. Despite everything, Maya decided to stay with the company, at least for now. Offers from other organizations tempted her, but she believed she could do more good from within. She wanted to be part of the solution, to help shape policies that prioritized fairness over profit. So when the board officially promoted her to senior analyst, citing her exceptional contributions, she accepted the position with gratitude and resolve. Her journey wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't over. But as she stood in front of the same conference room where it all began, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. Looking around at the faces, some familiar, some new, she realized that change was possible, not because of one person, but because of collective action. Because people refused to stay silent. "This isn't my victory," she said softly, addressing the room. "It's ours. Let's keep going." And with that, she walked out, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed the CEO's public apology were a whirlwind of activity. The company was under intense scrutiny, and Maya found herself at the center of it all. Every move she made, every email she sent, every meeting she attended was analyzed and discussed. Some people praised her for her courage, while others quietly questioned whether she had gone too far. But amidst the chaos, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger, a movement demanding accountability, fairness, and real change. Maya's promotion to senior analyst came with new responsibilities. She was now part of a task force created to overhaul the controversial contract and ensure future projects prioritized community needs. At first, the assignment felt overwhelming. The team consisted of seasoned executives who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, and Maya often found herself outnumbered in discussions. They spoke in jargon-heavy terms, tossing around phrases like risk mitigation and stakeholder alignment, as if these buzzwords could solve deep-rooted problems. But Maya refused to let herself be intimidated. She remembered why she'd spoken up in the first place, to protect the communities that would be impacted by the company's decisions. So when the group proposed watering down certain protections to make the contract more flexible, she pushed back firmly. "Flexibility is important," she said during one heated meeting, "but not if it means sacrificing fairness. If we're serious about helping these communities, we need to set clear guidelines, not leave room for loopholes." Her words sparked debate, but they also earned respect. Slowly, other members of the task force began siding with her. One executive admitted that he'd seen similar contracts fail before because of vague language. Another confessed that he'd always been uncomfortable with how companies prioritized profit over people, but never knew how to push for change. Together, They worked to draft a revised version of the contract, one that included stronger safeguards for local workers and stricter accountability measures for the company. While progress was being made internally, the external pressure didn't let up. Protesters continued to gather outside the headquarters, their chants echoing through the streets. Activists organized rallies in cities across the country, urging other companies to follow suit and adopt ethical practices. Social media played a huge role in amplifying their message, with hashtags like Breeding Fair Contracts and Community First trending daily. Journalists dug deeper into the issue, uncovering more examples of corporations exploiting underserved areas. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't just about one company. It was about an entire system that needed fixing. Maya became a central figure in this growing movement. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and spoke at events, sharing her story and advocating for systemic change. Her speeches resonated with audiences because they came from a place of authenticity. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, she emphasized the importance of listening to those most affected by corporate decisions. "We can't keep making promises without following through," she said during one panel discussion. "Real change happens when we involve the communities we're trying to help, not just as afterthoughts, but as partners. Their voices matter more than ours." Her words struck a chord with many, especially young professionals who saw themselves in her journey. Emails poured in from interns and entry-level employees thanking her for inspiring them to speak up. Some shared stories of their own struggles, of feeling powerless in a world dominated by money and influence. Maya responded to as many as she could, offering advice and encouragement. "You don't have to have a fancy title to make a difference," she told them. "Sometimes all it takes is believing in yourself and standing your ground." Despite the support, Maya faced challenges, too. Some critics accused her of seeking attention or using the controversy to advance her career. Others dismissed her efforts as naive, claiming that businesses couldn't survive without prioritizing profits. Even within the company, there were moments of resistance. A few executives tried to undermine her contributions, questioning her expertise or suggesting that someone more experienced should take the lead. But Maya refused to let negativity derail her. She leaned on her allies, both inside and outside the company, for strength. One of her colleagues, a mid-level manager who had initially avoided her, became a close confidant. Over coffee breaks, they brainstormed ways to navigate office politics and build consensus among skeptical team members. Another ally was a community organizer who had joined forces with the protesters. He introduced Maya to leaders from the neighborhoods the company planned to serve, giving her first-hand insight into their needs and concerns. These connections reminded Maya of what truly mattered. This fight wasn't about personal glory or climbing the corporate ladder. It was about creating opportunities for people who had been overlooked for far too long. With each step forward, she felt more determined to see it through. As the weeks turned into months, the revised contract took shape. It included provisions for mandatory local hiring quotas, transparent reporting on job creation, and regular check-ins with community representatives. The board approved the final draft, though not without some reluctance. The CEO, still smarting from the backlash, tried to frame the changes as his idea, but few believed him. His reputation had taken a hit, and whispers about his leadership style grew louder. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, she was proud of what they'd accomplished. The new contract represented a significant step toward fairness and accountability. On the other hand, she knew the battle wasn't over. Contracts could be rewritten, policies could be ignored, and promises could be broken. Real change required vigilance and a commitment to holding everyone accountable, including herself. Still, there were moments of joy along the way. When the company announced its plans to invest in job training programs for underserved communities, Maya received messages of gratitude from people she'd never met. One woman wrote to thank her for giving her son a chance at a better future. Another shared how the initiative had inspired her to pursue a career in tech. These stories kept Maya going, reminding her that even small actions could have a ripple effect. By the end of the year, Maya's life looked very different from where it had started. She was no longer the quiet intern sitting in the corner of the room. She was a leader, someone others looked to for guidance and inspiration. Her name appeared in headlines alongside phrases like corporate reform and ethical innovation. Yet despite the accolades, she remained grounded. She knew the work was far from done, and she vowed to keep pushing for progress, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. One evening, as she stood on her apartment balcony overlooking the city lights, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the doubt, the victories, they had all shaped her into the person she was today. She thought about the little girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of breaking barriers and making a difference. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, gazing out at the horizon. "There's so much more to do." And with that, she turned back inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The months that followed the rollout of the revised contract were a mix of triumphs and challenges. Maya had become a household name in corporate reform circles, but she quickly learned that fame wasn't what drove her. It was impact. The changes she helped implement were starting to take root, and while progress was slow, it was undeniable. Job training programs launched in underserved neighborhoods began producing graduates who landed positions within the company. Community leaders reported renewed trust in corporate initiatives, something that hadn't existed before. It was proof that when people worked together toward fairness, real change could happen. But Maya also knew better than anyone that success didn't come without pushback. Some executives still resented her for challenging the status quo. They grumbled behind closed doors about how things used to be simpler, or muttered under their breath about idealistic young employees. Occasionally, this tension spilled into meetings where debates grew heated over budget allocations or timelines. One particularly tense session left Maya feeling drained. An older executive, clearly frustrated with her insistence on prioritizing local hires, snapped at her during a discussion. "You can't expect us to bend over backward for every single community," he said sharply, his tone laced with condescension. "At some point, we have to think about the bottom line." Maya took a deep breath, refusing to let his words rattle her. She responded calmly but firmly. "If our bottom line doesn't include helping the communities we claim to serve, then what's the point? We're not just here to make money. We're here to make a difference." Her reply earned nods from several colleagues, including some who had initially been skeptical of her approach. Over time, Maya noticed a shift. People started coming around, not because they agreed with everything she said, but because they saw the results. Workers hired through the new programs brought fresh perspectives and energy to the company. Productivity improved, and morale soared among teams that included diverse voices. Slowly but surely, even the skeptics began to see the value in doing things differently. Outside the office, the movement continued to grow. Activists and community organizations kept the pressure on, ensuring the company stayed true to its promises. Social media campaigns highlighted both successes and shortcomings, holding the company accountable in real time. One viral post, shared by a local leader, praised the job training program, but pointed out delays in promised infrastructure improvements. Within hours, the company issued a statement addressing the concerns and outlining steps to resolve them. Transparency, once an afterthought, was now front and center. For Maya, these moments reinforced why she'd fought so hard in the first place. She realized that accountability wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was about creating systems where everyone had a stake in the outcome. It meant listening to feedback, owning mistakes, and working collaboratively to find solutions. This philosophy guided her as she tackled new projects, each one aimed at bridging gaps between corporations and the communities they served. One of her proudest achievements came when the company announced plans to partner with schools in underserved areas to create internships tailored specifically for students interested in tech careers. Maya played a key role in designing the program, drawing on her own experiences as a young woman navigating the industry. She insisted that the initiative focus not only on technical skills, but also on mentorship and leadership development. "Success isn't just about knowing how to code," she explained during a presentation to the board. "It's about believing you belong in the room and having people who support you along the way." When the program launched, Maya visited one of the participating schools to meet the students. Standing in front of a classroom filled with eager faces, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. These kids reminded her of herself, bright, curious, and full of potential. She shared her story, emphasizing the importance of perseverance and self-belief. Afterward, a shy teenager approached her, clutching a notebook tightly. "I want to do what you did," the girl said softly, her eyes wide with admiration. "But I'm scared I won't be good enough." Maya knelt down to meet her gaze, smiling warmly. "You don't have to be perfect," she replied. "Just show up, work hard, and never stop asking questions. That's how you'll find your place." The encounter stayed with her long after she left the school. It reminded her of why representation mattered, not just in boardrooms but in classrooms too. Seeing someone who looked like them succeeding gave these kids hope. And hope, Maya believed, was the foundation of change. As the year drew to a close, Maya reflected on how much had changed, not just for her, but for the company and the communities it touched. The revised contract had set a new standard for corporate responsibility, inspiring other businesses to follow suit. Competitors began revisiting their own practices, spurred by public demand for transparency and fairness. Industry conferences featured panels on ethical innovation with speakers citing Maya's work as a model for meaningful reform. Yet despite the accolades, Maya remained humble. She knew she hadn't done it alone. Every ally, every supporter, every person who had dared to speak up had played a part in this journey. Even those who had doubted her early on contributed in their own way, forcing her to refine her arguments and strengthen her resolve. In December, the company held its annual gala, a glitzy event attended by executives, investors, and community partners. Maya stood on stage alongside the CEO, accepting an award for excellence in corporate citizenship. As cameras flashed and applause filled the room, she scanned the crowd, her heart swelling with gratitude. She thought about all the late nights, tough conversations, and moments of doubt that had brought her here. This moment wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had believed in the possibility of a better future. In her acceptance speech, Maya kept her words simple but heartfelt. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It takes courage, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the way things have always been done. None of us can do it alone, but together, we can build something extraordinary." When the event ended, Maya stepped outside into the crisp winter air. The city sparkled around her, alive with energy and promise. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to pause, to breathe and take it all in. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to keep fighting, learning, and growing. Because for Maya, this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning.